rolling. This is Investigator Alan Morris. How come down here they call it investigator instead of detective?
I guess because we're general investigators. I work everything from, fraud cases, burglaries, bank robberies, pretty much anything and everything. We might get a call out, you just never know. It could be a normal day, but a normal day could turn to a busy day really quick. Really and truly, this job is life. A body was actually discovered in the county jurisdiction, and because of that, the sheriff's office responded for law enforcement to go out there.
I'm on my way. We got the call about 1:30 that day. When I got there, they were in the process of bringing the body to shore. Law enforcement officers had to actually physically grab hold of the individual by clothing and just ease him back to shore. Was this somebody that had perhaps fallen in the water or out of a boat? You just don't know. But when they brought him to shore, it was immediately evident to me that he had not fallen in the water accidentally. His wrist and his ankles were bound with speaker wire. That, to me, was a clear indication that he had been the victim of homicide.
When your victim is found floating in the water, it enormously complicates the case. Water does terrible things to human bodies. They can't tell the cause of death looking at the remains because they're in such poor condition.
Here, the elements in the south can be tricky, even in February and March. The water plays a factor in the decomposition and the speed.
The face is unrecognizable.
Positive identification was not made at that point, but I was thinking back just because we had already been investigating a missing person. I remember Ms. Brittany Green came in to report a missing person.
She says his name is Leon Harrison Jr., but everybody calls him JR, and he is the father of her 2 children. They no longer live together, but he routinely calls her every night to speak to the children. He hasn't called in 2 weeks.
A guy that has family, that has loved ones, that has children, they're not just gonna vanish off this earth.
Brittany explains to police that Mr. Harrison is 32 years old. He is an African-American male, but he has a rose tattooed on his inner right forearm, an identifying tattoo. Now Morris is trying to determine if this body that was found in the river is in fact his missing person. Investigator Morris generally works property crimes. If this is in fact a homicide, it'll be his very first.
The body was sent for autopsy. It was my first autopsy. So yeah, I mean, it was a nerve-wracking thing.
I recall my first autopsy very well. After you've been to several hundred of them, you tend not to pay attention. But the first one is a shock.
That had been the first time that I had actually seen him, because I wasn't there during the retrieval. It was gruesome. He was bounded by hand and foot. That's the most uncivilized way that I could ever see a person going out of this world.
The medical examiner explains to Morris that although he cannot determine the cause of death because of the decomposition level is so great, he can rule it as a homicide based on the bindings. The lacerations to the belly are not deep. They're not enough to cause exsanguination, in other words, bleeding to death. They're not enough to cause internal damage either.
It's hard to say what those were with the condition of the body due to the presence of animals and that sort of thing in the water.
There are also alligators in this river, but they prefer living things. Normally, they like a live target that they can kill and then eat. The medical examiner offers an opinion that perhaps a beating was involved that caused the death, blunt force trauma, but he can't even really say that. He just doesn't know. When your victim has obviously been in the water for an extended period of time, there is no way DNA trace is going to survive or fingerprints survive. So you're not going to find something that identifies somebody responsible for this. The findings of the autopsy were relatively useless, with one major exception. The presence of a rose tattoo on the right arm identifies this body as that of Leon Harrison Jr., also known as JR. The case of missing person is now retitled homicide. There's an expression in homicide. You go from being a new guy to an old guy in about 30 minutes. Morris is nervous, he's worried, he's all the right things. So he begins by inquiring about the victim.
Miss Brittany Green was brought in to give us some information about him and what he was like as a father.
Leon, he was a funny, outgoing person, big personality. Loved to smile, tell jokes. Loving, caring father.
My dad was goofy, funny, joyful, and active. We always used to watch Dallas Cowboys. They're a very great dad.
My first day playing football, and I remember running my first touchdown. He was running down the side like, oh, go Quest, go boy, go boy. He met me in the end zone. He was going crazy.
Brittany Green said he always was connected to those two kids, and he called them every night.
He would always come and check on his children.
The investigators talked to Green. Are there any issues? Does he have any enemies? The only thing she says is that he has an estranged wife, and her name is Taish Rue.
I learned of Taish probably like July of 2015. They got married, I believe, September.
She says he'd been married for a while, but they recently broke up, and he moved out.
He used to call me and talk to me about things that was going on in their relationship. He wasn't happy.
So we suddenly appear to have a dead man with recent marital troubles of some kind. That could be interesting. It could mean nothing. We've got to find out. So JR's estranged wife is of great interest to Morris. However, they find some difficulty in locating her. Morris decides to return to Taish Rue later and move on to JR's phone records.
We got any kind of phone records that we can get.
The evening of February 25th, he did have 2 phone calls from a man named Samuel Pillman, who could be the last person to see JR alive. So Morris wants to talk to this guy.
We did go to his job, but he was not there that day.
His boss tells him he lives at the Quality Inn. So Morris goes there thinking he'll reach Pillman. He knocks on the door. No one answers. He calls Pillman's cell phone. Pillman answers the phone. When Morris says who he is, Pillman hangs up. Now that raises an eyebrow. Pillman has just informed Morris he's a potential suspect. hanging up on a detective ensures that you're about to meet the detective. Well, let's review, Mr. Pillman. Now you get a phone call from a policeman and you don't want to talk to him. What do you have to do with the death of J.R.? When Morris calls him back, he takes a different approach. He says, look, I'm investigating the death of Leon Harrison Jr., and that's the only reason I want to talk to you. Mr. Pillman, why were you calling him?
He said they were going to meet up. He was going to buy some drugs from Leon Harrison Jr.
Well, my roommate and I wanted to celebrate a birthday, and so we thought we'd get a little high and JR could help us out. JR's got this side hustle. He sells a little bit of grass now and again.
And truly, to me, it didn't matter regardless of what his situation was. He was still murdered, and it didn't really matter whether he was a drug dealer or not.
So Pillman says also that the first call he made with JR said, all right, I'll come by your room and we'll make the deal there. And then he never shows up. So he calls him back. Only this time there's no answer. Is Pillman lying? Did JR show up at the Quality Inn and Pillman overcame him, robbed him of his drugs and his money, and then killed him?
When we were looking at his phone, so we got to analyze the data.
His conversation jives with the phone records because the second call Pillman made only lasted like 15, 20 seconds because there's no answer, like he said. So Pillman is dropped as a suspect.
Everything was a challenge. I mean, because at this point, we were already 2 weeks behind anyway, because he'd already been gone for 2 weeks. But I'm going to make sure I do everything I'm supposed to do. That's gathering evidence, talking to everybody I can. I have to keep moving.
So he returns to the effort to find Taish Rue, the estranged wife of the victim, to see what she can say about his life. This time, Morris's luck changes, and finally he finds Taish Rue.
And at the time, she was working at the steel mill as a security guard. So we went over there, and we spoke to her about Mr. Leon Harrison Jr.
They break the news to Taish Rue that her husband is in fact deceased.
We spoke to her very briefly at the steel mill, and we got her to come to the police department.
Taish works as a security guard at a steel mill in the area. JR worked there also. They ask her about his narcotics sales, and she immediately says, oh, that was a very minor, very occasional thing. And then they ask Taish to explain about their marriage.
We've been so off and on since March of 2016. We got an issue.
At first, she made it seem like everything was good, and then it wasn't so great.
We're talking 6 months, he didn't pay me rent. I don't know what he was doing with his money.
They met a few years ago, they got married, but money was always a problem. So they became forced to move in with her father and her brother as a married couple.
We had our issues, like I said, with infidelity.
She had told us they both had issues with infidelity. My understanding was she was doing what she wanted to do and he was doing what he wanted to do.
I realized that he was closer to another female. I was kind of upset and angry at that.
Taish explains that JR cheated on her. She discovered this and she kicked him out. But they had this on-again, off-again relationship for the last few months. They asked her, when's the last time you saw your husband? She said, February 25th.
Time you got off of work, can you tell us what took place?
My husband called me and said he would be at the house.
She said he came by around 10 o'clock in the evening to pick up some of his clothes.
The last time I saw him, he was standing and talking on his phone.
On the phone, just talking to anybody on the phone?
Rosario.
She then says he was on the phone with the other woman that she identifies as Rosario.
Why would I do that?
And they have a heated argument on the phone. Very heated. She says she could hear her through his phone.
You guys check this other girl, Rosario.
We have Thais saying that Rosario is a maniacal, crazy woman who's insanely jealous of her. And if you're out of control, angry, and jealous, what are you capable of? Just about anything, including murder.
When my dad passed, I did want it to be true, but I had to believe it.
Everybody around me was crying. It was like out-of-body experience, basically. But we just got to sit here and let the police do their job.
Investigators have learned about an enormously out-of-control argument between the victim and his girlfriend. So Morris is now extremely interested in Rosario. When somebody at the front desk says, there's a woman here named Rosario who wants to talk to you.
Appreciate you coming down here.
We did talk to Rosario. She kind of gave us an insight on what their relationship was. They were in some kind of romantic relationship.
She proceeds to tell them how she loves him desperately, and she's found out through other means that he's now dead. Why did you not report him missing?
Why have you not come forward before you say, hey, something's wrong, I don't know where my boyfriend's at?
Well, for one, because he's still married, and I didn't want to interfere in that. And first, I thought it was just maybe he was embarrassed or trying to let it die down because he knows his wife is like, rah, 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 you know.
So they ask Rosario, do you know Thais?
It's not a pretty relationship. From my understanding, she cheated first. She's cheated multiple times. He's tried to go back and fix it. And every time he goes back to try to fix it, it's another guy that she's with.
Rosario told us they had a marriage that may not have been going so well.
Thais was saying that this other woman was the source of the rage and the potential threat to JR. Now the other woman is telling a totally opposite tale from Thais. One of these two is lying. Which one is? Either or both? They asked Rosario when's the last time she saw JR. She said February 25th, 3:30 in the afternoon. She picks him up from work.
Around about 9 o'clock, he went to his dad's house for a bit around.
And later that evening, apparently, JR made his way to the home of his estranged wife, Thais. So they confront Rosario about the angry phone call that supposedly was made by her to JR the night of the 25th. She said, I've never had an angry phone call with JR. However, I got one from Thais.
He was over there, the phone rang. It was from his phone, so I answered.
And what time was this?
This had been after 10 by now. And it was the wife. And all I said was hello. And she started talking, y'all over here, y'all up, which I thought y'all was smarter than me, y'all was like outsmarting me.
She said she called me ranting and raving and screaming at me about being the, quote, other woman, unquote, and it was horrible.
Is this the first time you ever talked to this woman?
No. And I hung up the phone, and then she called back maybe like 5 minutes after that, and I didn't answer. I'm assuming that's when she left the first voicemail.
You really thought you was on top of the world, right? Dumbass.
Thais is cussing at her and threatening her. I guess she had learned about the relationship and she was mad.
Anything else you can think of that may help us? Anything?
He once mentioned that his wife said that, if she couldn't have him, nobody could. I believe the wife needs to be questioned. I just know for a fact that she's the last person who's seen.
She hands her phone over to the detectives. They review her text history and calls. This exactly confirms her story. Rosario's not a killer. She's just a heartbroken woman who lost her boyfriend. Now Morris understands Taish is the jealous rage factor, not Rosario.
Has he talked about any specific incidents with anybody else, like a problem with anybody?
So my brother Alex, they don't get along because he's always like put in the mix of their issues in their marriage. So, you know, of course, the brother's gonna take the sister's side.
She also goes on to say that Taisha's father, Alex Rue Sr., hates JR, and her brother, Alex Rue Jr., also hates JR because JR is a bad influence on his sister, and Alex Jr. sees himself as his sister's bodyguard. So now we've eliminated Rosario, so we're left with Taish and her family. Morris is buried up to his neck in emotion, lies, finger pointing, an extremely complicated web.
I lost a lot of sleep trying to figure it out and just making sure that you cover every aspect of it.
But he knows he has one thing that is the only physical evidence recovered is the wire used to bind the victim. That could be the answer to this case. Where did that come from?
But we believe that it could have been speaker wire. And a lot of places in Georgetown that sell speaker wire. So I went to Walmart looking to see if there was any kind of wiring that looked like that wiring. The idea would have been if they bought it from there, we could have maybe pulled surveillance footage and seen if we could see them buying it.
They contact the people that work in those departments, and they strike out. Nobody's bought any recently. Nobody sells the kind that they have in their hand. So Morris decides to go see Alex Rue Jr. He works at a garage.
We had got some information that he had worked on cars and he may have done some audio stuff in the past.
And a bell goes off in Morris's brain. He works with speaker wire, the very thing that JR is tied up with. He's not there, but the manager is there. Morris says, "Do you employ Alex Rue Jr.?" "Well, I do, but he only comes in a couple days a week. He installs radios in people's cars." "Do you have any of the wire here that he uses?" It's examined and compared to the wire found around the victim, and they're different.
We were not able to locate anything that connected the wire that Mr. Leon Harrison Jr. was bounded with. Could have practically came from anywhere.
So Morris understands he has no crime scene of occurrence. We only have a crime scene of discovery, floating down the Black River toward the Atlantic. But where was he killed? The likely scenario is he died in the Rue household.
Something bad happened in that house.
We had developed enough probable cause, circumstantial evidence to get a search warrant for the house.
We went to her house on High Market Street.
Alex Jr. and Sr. are seated right next to Taish.
We, of course, give them the search warrant, and then they have to come out of the house while we are conducting a search of the house.
We're taking photographs, we're searching rooms, we were looking for cutting objects, speaker wire, any kind of other DNA.
They walk into Taisha's bedroom. It's got wall-to-wall carpeting.
We noticed that there was missing pieces of carpet.
A cut piece of carpet's been replaced. Odd corners, odd angles, a terrible patch job. Now, why would you do that? They'd pull up that insert of carpet.
We removed the carpet padding, and then under there on the subfloor, there was what appeared to be a stain of some sort. We did a presumptive test that come back positive for blood.
Blood is discovered in Taisha's bedroom. There's so much blood, it's not just the carpet pad that's soaked, it's the subflooring.
And it looked like there was an attempt to clean up the blood. We spent hours in that room. We found several locations of blood.
There was some high-velocity spatter on the walls.
Blood spatter comes from blunt trauma, cast-off blood, from striking or beating someone, and probably an instrument or maybe fists.
Something bad happened in that room, we know that. We could tell by that amount of blood.
And so we processed the house, collected forensic evidence, and sent it off to the lab.
They want to be absolutely certain this is JR's blood, so they run a lab test, and they determine that is, in fact, the case. So JR meets his end in Taisha's bedroom. There's an enormous amount of blood. We have binding of a male victim. This is not something that any reasonable person would believe was done by one person, but two people can do that rather easily. This is all a family affair.
Taish, we brought her in again to speak to us.
There is blood in that house. They have circumstantial evidence only, and it's insufficient to proceed to an arrest.
Here's what we know. Your husband's blood is in the bedroom. We're not talking about a speck of blood like a speck. We're talking saturation.
And I showed her a picture of the subfloor with the saturation on the subfloor of blood.
This is soaked in. This is how big it was. That's your husband's blood.
But this has anything to do with him being hurt now. I do not.
Well, do you know anytime he bled that much? Because that
for
is...
a nosebleed, yeah.
No, that ain't no nosebleed.
She claimed it was a nosebleed, and my response was, there's just so much blood, I didn't know how it could be a nosebleed.
Taish, you could have had a fire hose up your nose and you wouldn't produce that much blood.
I have no idea why or where this came from.
That is a big injury. That's a life-threatening injury right there.
I will never hurt my husband, and I miss that from the bottom of my heart.
She said that she would never hurt her husband, and then I said, well, somebody did. He was killed in that room.
Was your dad and your brother at the house that night?
To my knowledge, they were.
The theory is quite simple. Taish, can you physically overcome JR? Can you bind him with speaker wire? Can you assault him to the point of death? Can you pick up and remove a dead body and throw it in a river? Not by yourself, you can't. She needs help. The family that kills together stays together.
My family would never do nothing to hurt anybody.
We didn't feel like we were getting honest answers from her.
Can you please give me a lawyer?
Yes, ma'am.
That's good, because you're going to need one.
Once she said she wanted a lawyer, she was free to go at that point.
This investigation has not yet produced probable cause to arrest anybody. Knowing and proving are two different things. For now, it seems unclear who committed what parts of this vicious crime.
At that point, we just have to, like I said, just continue looking for evidence. We want to know everything that happened. We want to know why you're following the evidence.
During this entire case, thus far, Morris has nothing you can explain to a jury or a judge. However, they are fortunate that a fellow named Andrew Johnson comes forward. Okay, Mr. Johnson, what do you know about this?
Can you station that for me?
Andrew Johnson says that after Mr. Harrison had been missing for a couple of weeks, he asked Alex Rue Jr. to drive to Myrtle Beach to help a friend move some furniture. So Alex Jr. agreed.
He started talking. He's like, yeah, you know, that guy took that for a ride. And my sister fell out, you know, talking about he cheating on my sister.
When Alex told you that he took Leo for a ride, what did that make you think? What did you think he did?
You know, maybe beat him up, but then immediately after he said he was out of here. He didn't say what he did to him.
Now, Andrew Johnson feels it's important to come in and tell the police this.
Bobby, you know what I'm saying? First time said some like that.
Because he said like he was bragging?
Yeah. I got the fever in that song told him to miss when he said it, you know, and he was laughing. I was like, man, what kind of dude is this?
Investigators need to confirm Andrew Johnson's story.
We got phone records. They give us analysis, and that's what we went off of.
They do a GPS location check on Alex Rue Jr.'s cell phone, and it shows that ride taking place to Myrtle Beach on the day when Johnson said it was. So it confirms the fact that that trip did occur. And Johnson says that that's what Rue told him during that conversation. And during that GPS search of Alex Rue Jr.'s cell phone, they also determined at 2 o'clock in the morning he went to the local Walmart, the 26th of February, probably the night that this homicide occurred.
That's one of the only things at that time that was open. We had to look at that video to see if they may have come in Walmart. We went through that Walmart footage. That was a lot of footage we had to go through. And we found them on camera, purchasing peroxide.
Hydrogen peroxide is a very effective cleaning agent, particularly when it comes to blood. You have Alex Rue Jr. in that surveillance tape buying hydrogen peroxide, but who's with him? Alex Rue Sr., dear old dad. The supposed smarter, older, more calm individual in most families. Not in this family. He's part of the cleanup effort. Now, are there innocent people buying things in Walmart at 2 o'clock in the morning? Sure there are. However, they're not buying hydrogen peroxide to clean up a whole lot of blood in their sister's bedroom. So that is the ultimate nail in the Rue coffin.
We look at that video and getting to the point of making an arrest. It was a good feeling that I was able to accomplish that. That was the first step, to me, in justice.
Homicide investigation is overwhelmingly filled with pressure. That's why when you have somebody by the throat, it is absolutely euphoric. So now everyone's in custody. Alex Jr., Taish, and her father. Based on the available evidence, investigators have a pretty clear idea of what happened to Leon Harrison Jr. on the night of February 25th, 2017. Taish and JR had a failing marriage with cheating on both sides. and the rage and the jealousy filled Taish to the maximum. She plotted her revenge, and Taish decided to text JR.
There was some text message back and forth in a conversation about a candlelight dinner in the bathtub. And that's what he was going over there for.
When he entered the house, she invited him into her bedroom, which I'm sure JR thought was promising. Thought he was going to have a reconciliation with Taish. JR had no idea he was walking into a trap designed to end his life.
There had been, no doubt, a history of conflict between the two, and I feel like that all came to a head that night in the house. Mr. Harrison's wife's brother was there. He got involved.
JR is attacked and subdued and overwhelmed by these people. And wire was used to tie his hands and feet, making him helpless. The beating was part of the rage factor, resulting in JR's demise. The coroner was unable to determine what was the fatal blow, and there's certainly no evidence to say which of these persons delivered that fatal blow.
There was a concerted effort at that point to get rid of the body, to clean up the scene, and to do what they could to distance themselves from that situation.
Then they remove JR from the premises, take him to the Black River, and toss him in. Believing that he's going to float down the river, wind up in the Atlantic Ocean, and never to be seen or heard from again.
We don't know exactly where they dumped him. So much time had went by, I don't know if we'll ever know.
In court, the jury determined the father was only involved in the cleanup and not with the homicide. So they charged him with obstruction of justice. They believed that Taish and her brother, Alex Jr., were the primary killers in this case, and they convicted them of murder. In the end, the judge sentenced Taish and her brother, Alex, to 37 years in prison each, and sentenced the father to 8 years. You're all done.
I cried when I heard the verdict because I knew that we finally got justice. Gerald, he was a hands-on father, hands-on with everything. Like sometimes I just want to pick up the phone, talk to him about his kids.
I haven't had a dad to see the teenage years. So a lot of things that a teenager would need their dad to show them, I really didn't have that. But when I make a touchdown, he was right there beside me.
Every year, we celebrate his birthday and things like that. We go release balloons where we found him at, or we'll go to his favorite restaurant. It's not easy, but I know he still's with me.
This homicide case. I mean, that one always stick out of my mind because it was my first one. And ultimately, we got justice for our family.
Good work, guys.
Homicide investigation is the ultimate test of the skill of the investigator. Good police work is the answer to the human condition. It won't prevent anything, but it certainly will punish those responsible. We are the consequences for your behavior. That's what we do. Next time on American Detective, dismemberment is an incredibly evil thing.
Their arms and legs were scattered around.
This perpetrator is intent on covering his tracks, but no one can be careful enough to stop a good detective. We're dealing with one sick individual.
The wind swept across the desolate moors, a raw and endless landscape of heather and peat, where the horizon stretched into a bleak infinity. On nights when the fog rolled in, silence fell heavy, interrupted only by the sound of one's own heartbeat. These moors were not yet infamous, not yet stained by whispers of unspeakable horrors. To most, they were simply another stretch of northern England's rugged countryside, vast and indifferent. But beneath their surface lay secrets that would, in time, chill the blood of an entire nation. The story of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley begins not in the silence of the moors, but in the everyday streets of post-war Manchester. The early 1960s were a paradoxical time. The shadow of World War II still lingered. Rationing had only recently ended, yet a new age of music, fashion, and restless youth was rising. Young people were caught between tradition and rebellion, drawn to new freedoms, but haunted by poverty and gray industrial landscapes. In this restless soil, figures like Brady and Hindley did not just appear. They grew, like weeds in the cracks of a society struggling to redefine itself. Ian Brady was born Ian Duncan Stewart in Glasgow in 1938 to a young, unwed waitress. From the beginning, his life was marked by instability. His father was absent, his mother unable to cope. Brady was placed in foster care with a couple who struggled to manage his volatility. As a boy, he was intelligent, sharp, but already darkly inclined. Teachers noted his temper, his cruelty toward animals, his obsession with violence and control. By his teens, he had begun stealing, drinking, drifting toward the margins of society. Glasgow's slums offered him little hope, but Brady wasn't simply a product of deprivation. He nurtured his own darkness, feeding it with books about power, war, and destruction. He idolized figures of authoritarian control, gravitating toward Nazi ideology, not out of ignorance but fascination. To him, cruelty was strength, and strength was survival. By the time he moved south to Manchester in the late 1950s, Brady was no longer a troubled boy. He was a young man with a mind sharpened like a blade. He found work at a chemical firm, quiet and efficient on the surface, but he lived in a world of fantasy fed by sadistic novels and histories of tyranny. He wrote disturbing essays about crimes of violence, read philosophy that glorified domination, and privately imagined acts that blurred the line between thought and action. Enter Myra Hindley. Born in 1942, she too grew up in the industrial north, in the working-class streets of Gorton, Manchester. Her childhood was colored by poverty and the strict, sometimes violent discipline of her father. Yet, unlike Brady, Hindley was not immediately drawn to cruelty. She was known as bright, lively, popular among friends, but she was restless, yearning for more than what life seemed to offer her. Beneath her ordinary exterior lay a hunger for belonging, for someone to give her purpose and identity. When she encountered Brady in 1961, working at the same firm, she saw in him not just a co-worker, but a figure of mystery and power. He was aloof, intense, with a gaze that unsettled and fascinated her. It began, as such things often do, with glances, conversations, and exchange of books. Brady introduced Hindley to his obsessions, to Nietzsche, de Sade, Mein Kampf. He spoke of cruelty not as evil, but as truth, as nature's way. He framed morality as weakness, compassion as failure. Hindley, impressionable and eager to please, found herself not recoiling, but drawn in. Brady offered her what no one else had, the chance to be more than ordinary, to live without rules, to taste forbidden power. By 1963, their relationship was no longer merely romantic. It was conspiratorial, built on a shared fantasy of dominance and destruction. What is it that transforms ordinary people into monsters? For Brady and Hindley, it was a fusion of psychology and circumstance. Brady needed someone to validate his fantasies, someone to witness and share them. Hindley needed someone to lead her out of the mundane, to make her special, even if it meant descending into evil. Together, they created a closed world where cruelty was not only acceptable, but exhilarating. They watched films of Nazi marches, read crime reports aloud, and talked endlessly of transgression. Yet talk was not enough. Their fantasies demanded flesh and blood. The first victim was a child. July 12, 1963. Pauline Reed, just 16 years old, dressed in her best clothes, set out for a dance in Gorton. She was a friend of Hindley's younger sister, known to her family, full of youth and promise. Hindley, driving her new van, offered Pauline a lift, saying she needed help searching for a lost glove on the moors. The girl, unsuspecting, accepted. Brady followed on his motorcycle, shadowing the van as it wound its way out of the city and onto the empty expanses of Saddleworth Moor. What happened there remains a scar on history. Brady led Pauline away under the pretense of helping search. Hindley waited, the engine idling, her heart pounding. The minutes stretched, the silence of the moors broken only by distant cries. When Brady returned, his hands were smeared with blood. Pauline had been beaten, raped, her life extinguished in violence unimaginable. Together, they buried her body on the moor, the earth swallowing the evidence, the heather bending back as though nothing had happened. To the world, Pauline had simply vanished. It was the beginning of a pattern. The thrill of the crime did not repel Hindley. It bound her more tightly to Brady. To share in such a secret was intoxicating. It was their proof of loyalty, of belonging to something greater than themselves. For Brady, the act was not only about lust or cruelty, but about control, about proving his philosophy in blood. Each murder would be a ritual, a statement, a dark echo of the ideologies he worshipped. November 1963. They struck again. John Kilbride, 12 years old, was lured from a market by Hindley, who asked for his help carrying packages. Promised a lift home, he entered the car. Brady was waiting. Again they drove to the moors. Again the boy never returned. His disappearance, like Pauline's, puzzled the community, but raised no suspicion strong enough to point toward Brady and Hindley. Missing children were not uncommon in working-class areas, often dismissed as runaways. The moors remained silent witnesses, holding the graves in their vastness. The killings were not frenzied, not chaotic. They were planned, deliberate, carried out with chilling calculation. Brady kept souvenirs, photographs, notes. Hindley kept up the facade of normal life, living with her grandmother, working, smiling, blending in. Neighbors saw nothing unusual. To them, she was a young woman with striking platinum hair, devoted to her boyfriend. Behind closed doors, however, she recorded Brady's fantasies in her diary, carefully documenting their escalating darkness. December 1964. Their third known victim, Keith Bennett, just 12 years old. A boy walking to his grandmother's house after visiting his mother. Hindley pulled alongside, offered a lift. His trusting smile was the last his family would ever see. Once again, the Moores received another child, another grave hidden under heather and stone. The horror deepened, yet their bond only strengthened. For Hindley, each crime seemed to erase the possibility of return. She was too complicit, too bound to Brady to ever escape. For Brady, the crimes were evidence of his power, his ability to shape another person's morality, to bend her to his will. Their relationship had become a pact sealed in death. By 1965, the murders continued. Leslie Ann Downey, 10 years old, abducted on Boxing Day from a fairground. She was taken to Hindley's home, where what followed was so cruel that even seasoned detectives would later weep. Brady insisted on recording Leslie's voice on tape, her cries, her pleas for her mother. Hindley's voice, too, was captured, ordering the child to undress, cold, detached, participating in the ritual. It was a recording that would one day shatter the nation's composure in court, but at the time it was merely another secret, hidden behind drawn curtains. When Leslie's body was buried on the moors, another innocent life had been extinguished, another family broken beyond repair. Each crime brought greater risk, yet Brady believed himself untouchable. He began speaking more openly of violence, testing boundaries, drawing others into his orbit. It was this arrogance that would ultimately unravel their dark reign. For now, though, in the mid-1960s, the Moors still held their silence. Families searched for missing children, and the names Ian Brady and Myra Hindley remained unknown to the world at large. The story had only begun. The house in Hattersley, a council estate flat where Myra Hindley lived with her grandmother, became more than just a home. It was a front, a mask of ordinary life concealing a nightmare within its walls. Neighbors saw Myra as polite, somewhat aloof, but hardly threatening. She helped carry shopping, looked after her grandmother, walked her dog Puppet across the estate. To the outside world, she was just another young woman of the North, but behind the drawn curtains, something unspeakable was festering. It was in this house that the horrors reached their most chilling crescendo. By late 1964, Ian Brady's fantasies had evolved beyond the desolate landscape of Saddleworth Moor. The moors were still his chosen graveyard, but now he wanted something more, something that would feed his ego and preserve his cruelty. He wanted evidence, records, trophies. Killing was no longer enough. He wanted to hear his victims suffering again and again, even after they were gone. And Hindley, the loyal disciple, did not protest. She prepared, she facilitated, she ensured everything appeared normal, as though nothing extraordinary was happening under that roof. Boxing Day, 1964. Manchester buzzed with families out shopping, children clutching new toys, the winter air filled with laughter and the lingering smell of roasted chestnuts from street vendors. It was supposed to be a season of warmth, of hope. For 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey, the fairground was a place of wonder, its lights flickering against the dark December sky. She had gone out, small and trusting, a child wrapped in the innocence of her age. Hindley and Brady prowled the fairground with a calculated patience, eyes scanning the crowd, waiting for opportunity. They saw Leslie, alone for just a moment, vulnerable in the chaos of the carnival atmosphere. Hindley approached first, her voice calm, maternal, the kind of voice that disarms a child's instincts. She asked for help carrying some packages, promised a quick ride home. To Leslie, this woman didn't look dangerous. She looked kind, ordinary, someone's daughter or sister. The car door closed, and the fairground lights faded behind them. The drive back to Bannock Street must have felt long to Leslie, though she likely didn't yet realize what awaited her. When they arrived, Hindley led her inside, the grandmother asleep upstairs, unaware. What happened next is documented not by speculation, but by evidence so undeniable, so horrific, that it would haunt jurors, police officers, and the entire British public for decades. Brady insisted on a tape recorder. He wanted control, documentation, the power to replay his dominance over and over. The microphone caught every word, every cry. On that reel-to-reel tape, Leslie's small voice trembled with fear as she pleaded for her mother. "Please, I want to go home," she whispered, her words fractured by sobs. Hindley's voice is heard too, commanding, cold, detached, instructing the child to undress, to obey. The cruelty was not impulsive. It was orchestrated, rehearsed in their twisted imaginations, and executed with chilling precision. Later, when the tape would be played in court, seasoned detectives would weep openly, unable to contain their grief and rage. Hardened professionals, men who had seen war and murder, broke down at the sound of a child's suffering, recorded like a souvenir. It was the piece of evidence that would strip away any pretense, any doubt, leaving only the undeniable truth of the monsters Brady and Hindley had become. After the recording, after the ritual humiliation, Leslie was killed. Her small body was wrapped, carried into the night, and driven to the moors. The earth swallowed her as it had the others, the heather bending back as though nothing had disturbed it. Another family's joy extinguished. Another name added to the list of the missing. Yet still, the pattern did not stop. Brady's hunger grew, his arrogance expanding with each crime. He began to speak more openly, to involve others on the periphery of his plans. He boasted of violence, as though daring fate to expose him. It was this arrogance, this need to prove himself, that would eventually crack the facade of secrecy. By 1965, they sought another victim. Edward Evans, 17 years old, was lured not from a fairground or a market, but from a railway station. He was older than their previous victims, stronger, a young man with his life ahead of him. Brady met him in Manchester and brought him back to Hindley's home in Hattersley. The plan was not simply murder, it was spectacle. Brady wanted an accomplice, a witness beyond Hindley, someone he could dominate and corrupt. He chose David Smith, the husband of Hindley's younger sister, Maureen. David Smith was young, impressionable, and had grown up rough. Brady saw in him a potential recruit, someone he could mold as he had molded Hindley. That night, Hindley invited her sister and brother-in-law over under the guise of casual company. But only David came. As the evening wore on, Brady revealed his true intentions. He led Evans into the living room, striking him with an axe handle, overpowering him with brutal force. Evans's cries filled the house, echoing in the small flat. But Hindley did not intervene. Smith, shocked, frozen, was forced to watch as Brady strangled the life out of the young man. The murder was savage, bloody, and unlike the controlled abductions of children, it was chaotic. Blood smeared the walls, the carpet soaked in violence. When it was over, Evans's body lay lifeless on the floor, another victim in their growing catalog of destruction. Brady looked to Smith, expecting loyalty, expecting complicity. He had miscalculated. David Smith left that night shaken to his core. He returned home to Maureen, pale, trembling, his clothes still bearing the stench of death. He could not carry the weight of what he had seen. By morning, he told her everything. Together, they went to the police. The facade was cracking. For the first time, there was a witness, a living person who had seen Brady in the act, who could describe in detail what had happened in that Hattersley flat. When police arrived, Hindley tried to play the role of the dutiful daughter, calm, cooperative. Brady attempted to mask his fury, acting as though nothing were amiss. But the evidence was too glaring to ignore. The body of Edward Evans was discovered, wrapped in plastic, hidden in the bedroom. The truth was spilling into daylight. Their arrest sent ripples through the community. At first, it was believed to be a singular crime, a shocking murder in a modest council flat. But whispers soon spread, threads connecting the couple to other disappearances, the missing children whose faces still haunted parents across Manchester. The investigation deepened. Police searched their home, uncovering suitcases hidden in a left luggage office. Inside were photographs of the moors, maps, and most damning of all, the tape recording of Leslie Ann Downey's final moments. When detectives played the tape, silence fell heavy in the room. Hardened officers listened in disbelief, the air thick with grief and rage. Some left the room unable to continue, tears streaming down their faces. It was evidence not only of murder, but of unimaginable cruelty, of a child's suffering preserved by her killers as a trophy. Soon, photographs surfaced, images of Hindley posing with her dog on Saddleworth Moor. To most, they looked like ordinary snapshots. A young woman smiling against a bleak landscape. But to investigators, they were clues, breadcrumbs pointing to the burial sites of children. The moors became not just a crime scene, but a cemetery stretching as far as the eye could see, each patch of earth a potential grave. The community was stunned. Parents clutched their children tighter, afraid to let them wander. Newspapers screamed headlines of horror, branding Hindley the most evil woman in Britain, her platinum hair and cold stare becoming symbols of corruption and betrayal. Brady was cast as the sadist, the manipulator, the embodiment of evil. Together, they became the nation's nightmare, the couple who had lured children with kindness only to bury them in the earth. Search parties combed the moors, spades sinking into the cold ground, officers and volunteers scouring every ridge and hollow. The landscape, once indifferent, became a place of mourning. Each discovery was like a wound reopened, each shallow grave a reminder of innocence destroyed. Families of the victims gathered, torn between hope and despair. Mothers who had clung for years to the belief that their children might return now faced the brutal truth. Their little ones had not run away, had not wandered too far. They had been taken, used, discarded like objects. The grief was raw, unbearable, and yet it united a community in sorrow and outrage. As the case built, as the evidence mounted, Brady and Hindley were no longer just suspects. They were symbols of how evil could hide in plain sight. Ordinary faces, ordinary lives, yet capable of crimes so extraordinary in their cruelty that they seemed almost inhuman. And yet, they were human, which made it all the more terrifying. The trial loomed ahead, but already the nation had judged them. The Moors, once silent, now whispered the names of the lost. Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, Leslie Ann Downey, Edward Evans. Their voices, silenced by violence, echoed in the minds of millions. The question was no longer whether Brady and Hindley had killed, but how many, and how deeply their darkness had scarred the land. The arrest of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley was only the beginning. The true unraveling came in the days and weeks that followed, as investigators pulled apart the threads of their lives and uncovered the hidden fabric of their crimes. At first glance, it seemed like a straightforward case. A young man, Edward Evans, brutally murdered in a Hattersley flat, his killers caught red-handed. But there was something about the details that didn't sit still in the minds of detectives. Brady's arrogance, Hindley's icy calm, the way David Smith's testimony hinted at darker truths beneath the surface. Everything pointed to a story larger than a single night of violence. In the interrogation room, Brady projected defiance. His posture was rigid, his voice steady, as though he believed he could control the narrative with the same dominance he had wielded over Hindley and his victims. He toyed with language, quoting philosophy, painting himself as superior to those questioning him. To the police, this wasn't confidence, it was contempt. Hindley, on the other hand, played a different role. She spoke softly, presented herself as a dutiful granddaughter, a woman caught in the orbit of a dangerous man. Her wide eyes and carefully measured words suggested innocence, but her composure was too rehearsed, her detachment too unnatural. When officers searched the left luggage lockers at Manchester Central Railway Station, the illusion collapsed. Inside one suitcase, They found photographs, grainy black and white images of children, disturbing and intimate, proof of a pattern. Among them were snapshots of the moors, with Hindley smiling against the bleak backdrop, her dog puppet at her side. At first they looked like holiday photos, meaningless to the untrained eye. But investigators saw them for what they were: trophies, markers of burial grounds, breadcrumbs left by killers who couldn't resist returning to their crimes. And then there was the tape. When the reels began to turn, when the sound of Leslie Ann Downey's fragile voice filled the room, every man present felt the air leave his lungs. The pleading of a child, her desperate cries for her mother, were unbearable. "Please, God, please." Her voice cracked, trembling in fear. In the background, Hindley's voice cut through, calm, commanding, demanding compliance. It was proof not only of Brady's sadism, but of Hindley's complicity. Any image she tried to project of being a passive partner dissolved in the face of that recording. She wasn't just there. She was participating. The officers who listened would carry that sound with them for the rest of their lives. Hardened men who had seen dead bodies on the moors and carnage on city streets broke down in tears, some walking out of the room unable to continue. The tape didn't just prove a crime. It seared itself into the conscience of the nation. When its existence became known, it would transform Hindley from a mysterious accomplice into the symbol of something much darker. A woman who betrayed her very nature by standing alongside a sadist, urging a child to obey. As investigators scoured the moors with shovels and spades, a grim procession of search parties stretched across the landscape. The wind was sharp, the ground unyielding, but they dug with relentless determination. The moors, once a place of solitude, became a graveyard under siege, its silence broken by the clatter of metal against stone. Days turned into weeks, officers and volunteers combing every ridge, every hollow. The earth slowly surrendered its secrets. The first discovery was the body of Leslie Ann Downey, wrapped and buried shallowly beneath the peat. The sight silenced even the most seasoned detectives. She had been a child, barely 10, reduced to evidence in a case that had already shaken the country. Not long after, John Kilbride was found, the 12-year-old boy missing since 1963. His family had spent years searching, clinging to the faint hope he might return, only to be confronted with the reality of a grave. Each body recovered was a wound reopened. Each name confirmed as a victim deepened the national grief. Still, not all were found. Keith Bennett, the smiling 12-year-old last seen walking to his grandmother's house, remained missing. His mother, Winnie Johnson, searched the moors herself for years after. Her grief turned into an endless pilgrimage. Decades later, her son's body would still not be recovered, his resting place known only to the killers who carried the secret to their graves. That absence, Keith's absence, would become one of the most haunting elements of the Moors murders, a reminder that even justice leaves voids it cannot fill. Meanwhile, in Manchester, the trial preparations began. The newspapers erupted in frenzy, their headlines screaming words like evil, monster, witch. The faces of Brady and Hindley were plastered across every front page. For the British public, this was more than just another crime story. It was the collapse of trust itself. The idea that two ordinary people, living in a council estate, shopping at local markets, smiling to neighbors, could abduct, torture, and kill children was unthinkable. Yet here it was, undeniable. In the lead-up to the trial, Hindley tried to craft a narrative of herself as manipulated, as brainwashed by Brady's influence. She painted herself as a woman in love, swept into the madness of a man she could not resist. But the evidence told a different story. Her voice on the tape, her presence in the photographs, her role in luring children. These were not the acts of a bystander. They were acts of choice, and the court would not forget. January 1966. The trial of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley opened at Chester Assizes. Crowds gathered outside, their faces twisted in anger, in sorrow, in disbelief. Parents of the victims sat in the courtroom, their grief palpable, their eyes fixed on the killers who had stolen everything from them. Brady sat impassive, his arrogance intact, as though he were the one judging those around him. Hindley maintained her mask of composure, her platinum hair carefully styled, her expression controlled. But the evidence stripped away their defenses. David Smith took the stand, his testimony a chilling recount of Edward Evans's murder. He described the sound of blows, the sight of Brady's frenzied attack, the blood that soaked the room. His words painted a picture so vivid that the courtroom fell into horrified silence. Then came the tape, played for the jury, for the press, for the parents of Leslie Ann Downey. As Leslie's cries filled the courtroom, her mother collapsed, her sobs echoing through the chamber. Reporters wept openly, jurors averted their eyes, some visibly shaking. It was not just evidence. It was an emotional assault, forcing everyone present to confront the unimaginable cruelty inflicted on a child. The photographs followed. Images of Hindley on the moors, her dog puppet at her side, became damning symbols. To most, they were meaningless snapshots. To the jury, they were markers of death. Each smile, each pose, was now seen through the lens of murder. The ordinary became sinister. The familiar became horrifying. The defense tried to argue coercion, tried to frame Hindley as the manipulated partner, but the weight of evidence crushed such arguments. The coldness of her voice on the tape, the deliberate way she had lured children, the precision with which they had hidden bodies, all pointed to willing participation. The jury saw not a woman swept up in love, but a woman who chose to stand shoulder to shoulder with evil. As the trial wore on, the public's fury deepened. Outside the courthouse, crowds chanted, their anger uncontainable. Newspapers sold out within hours, every headline screaming about the Moors murderers. Inside homes across Britain, parents locked their doors tighter, watched their children more closely, and whispered to one another about the monsters who had walked among them. The verdict, when it came, felt inevitable. Brady was convicted of the murders of John Kilbride, Leslie Ann Downey, and Edward Evans. Hindley was convicted of the murders of Downey and Evans, and of being an accessory to the murder of Kilbride. Both were sentenced to life imprisonment, the maximum penalty available, though many in the public cried out for more, for a punishment that could equal the suffering they had caused. Yet even with the convictions, the story did not end. The Moors still held secrets, families still waited for closure, and Brady and Hindley themselves, locked away behind prison walls, continued to exert a morbid fascination on the public. Their names became etched into the collective memory of Britain, not just as criminals, but as symbols of betrayal, of cruelty, of how ordinary faces could hide unfathomable evil. For the families of the victims, the trial brought a kind of justice, but no relief. The empty chairs at dinner tables, the silenced laughter of children, remained. For them, there was no closure, only survival. And for Britain, the Moors' murders became a scar that would never fully heal, a story retold generation after generation as both a warning and a lament. But behind bars, Brady and Hindley were not finished. Their lives, their manipulations, their attempts to control the narrative would continue for decades. The Moors, silent and vast, would remain tied to their names forever, a landscape transformed into a graveyard of memory. The horror they had unleashed could not be buried. It would rise again and again, each time their names were spoken, each time a mother's tears fell on the cold earth of Saddleworth Moor. Prison walls closed around Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, yet the horror of their crimes seeped far beyond the confines of the cells that now held them. The trial had ended. The verdict had been spoken, but the names of the victims still echoed through Britain's collective memory. For the grieving families, life fractured into two halves: the time before their children vanished, and the endless after. The earth of Saddleworth Moor had given up some of its secrets, but not all. Beneath its vast, windswept silence, questions still festered, gnawing at the minds of detectives, parents, and the nation itself. Inside prison, Brady and Hindley adapted to their new existence, each in their own way. Brady was placed in Durham prison, Hindley in Holloway. Neither expressed remorse. Brady, cold and calculating, relished the notoriety, aware that he had become a symbol of evil in the public imagination. He saw himself not as a criminal, but as someone apart, superior, a man who had challenged morality and lived by his own twisted philosophy. In his cell, he read voraciously, wrote letters laced with arrogance, and continued to immerse himself in works of philosophy and sadism. The outside world despised him, but he thrived on it. Every headline, every mention of his name, fed his ego. Hindley's path was more complicated. She was a woman branded as Britain's most hated figure. Her photograph, platinum blonde hair framing a face of defiant coldness, burned into the public consciousness. In Holloway, she crafted a new mask. To the authorities, she began to present herself as a reformed figure, a woman manipulated by a dangerous man, someone capable of rehabilitation. She attended church, spoke to chaplains, wrote letters in a tone of contrition. Yet beneath the surface, her connection to Brady endured. Their letters crossed prison walls, filled with declarations, codes, and whispers of secrets yet to be told. The public, however, was not fooled. The anger did not fade. For many, Hindley's femininity made her betrayal all the more intolerable. Women were meant to nurture, to protect, to embody compassion. To see one stand side by side with a sadist, luring children to their deaths, and to hear her voice on that tape, commanding, cold, was unforgivable. She was no victim in the eyes of the nation. She was a predator, a Judas, a reminder that evil wears many faces, and yet the Moors remained the greatest wound. The photographs of Hindley with her dog puppet, smiling against the bleak horizon, had become grotesque clues. Investigators pored over them, searching for landmarks, small rises and dips in the land that might correspond to burial sites. But the moors were vast, endless, their contours shifting with each season. Even with hundreds of searchers combing the ground, the secrets did not easily yield. For the families, this was torment beyond comprehension. Winnie Johnson, mother of Keith Bennett, returned to the moors again and again, walking the wind-swept paths, scanning the horizon, searching for any sign of her boy. She never found him. For decades, she pleaded with authorities, begged Brady to tell her where Keith was buried. Each year that passed without answers deepened her grief, a wound that never closed. Brady, arrogant as ever, toyed with her. He hinted, suggested, manipulated, but never gave her the closure she sought. Keith's body was never found, and with it, Winnie Johnson carried her sorrow to her own grave. Even in prison, the pair continued to exert influence. Journalists clamored for letters, for interviews, for insights into the minds of the Moors' murderers. Brady, in particular, used the media as a stage. He wrote of his contempt for society, framed his crimes as acts of philosophy rather than murder. He saw himself as a Nietzschean figure, someone beyond good and evil, relishing the outrage his words provoked. Hindley, meanwhile, began to work on reshaping her image, reaching out to those willing to believe she had been coerced, manipulated, brainwashed. She found sympathizers, writers, campaigners, even clergy, who saw her as a woman who could be rehabilitated. The prospect of her release would, in time, ignite new storms of public fury. But beneath the intellectual games and manipulations, the brutality of their acts could never be erased. The tape of Leslie Ann Downey's final moments remained the most damning artifact. It was not simply evidence, it was a haunting. Anyone who heard it was marked forever, forced to carry the cries of a child into their own nightmares. That tape made it impossible to believe in Hindley's innocence, impossible to see Brady as anything but monstrous. The prison years dragged on, but the case never faded from the headlines. Each appeal, each new revelation, reignited public rage. The families of the victims, forced to relive their grief with every mention, spoke out, determined to ensure the killers never walked free. The moors themselves became a place of pilgrimage for grief, a landscape where sorrow and memory intertwined. Visitors stood in silence, feeling the weight of history in the cold wind, knowing they walked over the graves of stolen children. And still, Brady played his games. He confessed to more murders, then retracted. He claimed to know more burial sites, then refused to reveal them. He spoke of philosophy, of cruelty, of the nature of power, as though the deaths of children were mere footnotes in his warped worldview. Each statement from him was like salt poured into wounds that never healed. Hindley, too, attempted to manipulate perception. She converted to Catholicism, spoke of repentance, positioned herself as Brady's victim. She gained support from those who believed in second chances, even as the families of her victims begged the authorities never to let her out. What made their stories so chilling was not only the brutality of the crimes, but the ordinariness of their lives before and after. They were not monsters from birth, not supernatural figures of evil. They were human, and that humanity made their choices unbearable. It forced the public to confront a truth it did not want to face, that evil is not an abstract force, but something that can live behind the face of a neighbor, a co-worker, even a lover. Brady and Hindley embodied that truth with devastating clarity. In the years after their sentencing, the Moores murders became more than just a case. They became a cultural scar, a story retold in whispers, in headlines, in documentaries. The names of the victims, Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, Leslie Ann Downey, Edward Evans, became symbols of innocence betrayed. The photographs of Brady and Hindley became shorthand for horror, and the Moores themselves, once only a stretch of bleak countryside, became forever entwined with death, sorrow, and unanswered questions. As decades passed, the world changed. New crimes, new scandals, new tragedies emerged. But whenever Brady or Hindley's names resurfaced, the nation shuddered as if no time had passed at all. The wounds remained raw, the grief unending, and through it all, the Moores stood silent, bearing witness, their cold winds carrying the weight of voices silenced long ago. The trial may have ended in 1966, but the story of the Moores murders was far from over. Behind bars, Brady and Hindley would continue to manipulate, to provoke, to haunt. Outside, families would continue to search, to demand, to mourn. And the Moores, stretching endlessly into the horizon, would keep their secrets, reminding Britain that some darkness never fades. Time inside a prison cell can crush a spirit, or it can give it room to fester. For Ian Brady, the walls of Durham and later Ashworth Hospital became less a cage and more a stage, a place from which he could continue his theater of cruelty. For Myra Hindley, Holloway became her workshop of reinvention, where she labored to reshape her image from devil incarnate to the role of a woman wronged, desperate for redemption. The decades stretched forward like a corridor with no end, yet both of them found ways to keep themselves at the center of Britain's darkest conversations. Brady was never content to vanish into obscurity. He filled his days with reading and writing, immersing himself in works of Decode, Nietzsche, and the literature of power and sadism. To him, murder had never been just about killing. It had been about philosophy, about enacting his twisted worldview on the bodies of innocents. Now, imprisoned and watched, he wielded words instead of weapons. Each letter, each interview, each sly admission designed to provoke and wound. He relished the image of himself as an outlaw thinker, a man who had dared to act on ideas most would never dare voice. The public loathed him for it, but their hatred was exactly the fuel he craved. Hindley's path was different. The iconic photograph from the trial, her pale face framed by stiff blonde hair, eyes blank with defiance, had branded her forever as Britain's most hated woman. She understood this, and she understood that to survive, she had to transform that image. Slowly, carefully, she began to cultivate a persona of remorse. She attended chapel, spoke to nuns, exchanged letters with supporters on the outside who saw her as a tragic figure. She described herself as a woman manipulated, seduced, and broken by a sadistic lover. It was a narrative designed to soften, to persuade, to plant the possibility that she might one day deserve freedom. But for the families of the victims, there was no transformation. There was no narrative that could erase the sound of Leslie Ann Downey's voice on that tape, or the image of Hindley luring children to their deaths. To them, Hindley's attempts at redemption were nothing but another manipulation, another mask. Every time her name appeared in headlines linked to parole hearings or petitions for release, the families braced themselves, steeling against the possibility that the woman who had helped destroy their children's lives might walk free. The moors remained the silent centerpiece of the story, their vast emptiness holding both answers and torment. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, new searches were launched. Hindley, by then seeking to strengthen her image of remorse, offered to assist, leading police back to Saddleworth Moor. In a caravan of officers and journalists, she walked the desolate landscape, pointing to rises in the land, depressions in the ground. It was a grotesque sight. The woman who had lured children to their deaths now guiding searchers to their possible resting places. Cameras captured her every move, her every gesture. To some, it looked like cooperation. To others, it was nothing more than another performance. And still, Keith Bennett was not found. The boy who had disappeared on his way to his grandmother's house remained missing, his body hidden beneath the peat, his grave known only to the killers. For his mother, Winnie Johnson, the years of searching stretched into decades. She walked the moors herself, scanning the endless horizon, begging Brady for answers. Her letters to him were filled with desperation, appeals to his humanity. But Brady had no humanity to offer. He replied with cold hints, cryptic suggestions, words designed to torment rather than reveal. He enjoyed her suffering, used it as another form of power. The cruelty of withholding was, for him, as satisfying as the cruelty of killing. In prison, Hindley clung to her campaign for release. She gained support from influential figures, writers, priests, campaigners who believed in the possibility of change. They argued she had been young, impressionable, manipulated by Brady, and that decades behind bars had transformed her. But the families of the victims stood as immovable sentinels against her cause. They spoke to the press, wrote to officials, appeared on television, repeating the same simple truth. She was no victim, she was no innocent, and no length of time could undo what she had done. Each new parole hearing, each new legal motion, became a theater of pain. Mothers and fathers relived the crimes, the headlines, the photographs. They sat in courtrooms trembling with grief and rage, determined to ensure that Hindley never breathed the air of freedom again. The British public, too, remained fiercely opposed. Polls consistently showed that Hindley was considered beyond forgiveness, beyond redemption. She was the embodiment of betrayal, the woman who had turned her back on everything humanity should represent. Brady, meanwhile, was transferred to Ashworth Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility, after being declared mentally unfit for prison. There, he continued to cultivate his image as an intellectual outsider. He wrote a book, The Gates of Janus, offering his reflections on the minds of serial killers. He positioned himself not as a monster, but as an analyst, a man who understood killers because he was one of them. The publication of his writings reignited outrage. Families of victims spoke out furiously, arguing that he should never be given a platform. Yet Brady, locked in his cell, relished the fury. He was still capable of reaching beyond the walls, still able to wound. His physical health declined over the years, but his cruelty remained sharp. He embarked on hunger strikes, demanding the right to die, only to be force-fed by hospital staff. He claimed he sought control over his own end, yet he refused to give control over the secrets that mattered most: the location of Keith Bennett's grave. That knowledge he carried with him, dangling it like a poisoned fruit, a final weapon against the grieving mother who begged for answers until her last breath. The decades rolled on, each year carrying new generations further from the crimes of the 1960s, yet the Moors' murders never faded from memory. They became a national reference point for evil, a scar that refused to heal. For those who lived through the trial, the photographs of Hindley and Brady were burned into the mind's eye, symbols of a betrayal so deep it could not be forgotten. For younger generations, their names became shorthand for horror, retold in classrooms, in documentaries, in late-night conversations about the nature of evil. Hindley's final years were marked by the same contradictions that defined her life. She continued to seek release, to frame herself as rehabilitated. Yet she never escaped the shadow of that tape.